Two oil states struck black gold in the North Sea. One built a trillion-dollar fortune, the other never escaped dependence. The difference wasn't geology, it wasn't luck, it wasn't even oil prices. It was something far less visible and far more powerful. Norway's sovereign wealth fund holds over $1.6 trillion today. That's $280,000 for every single citizen. But the paradox runs deeper than the number. Norway didn't get rich by spending its oil money. It got rich by refusing to touch it. While other petrostates bought political loyalty with subsidies and built monuments to short-term thinking, Norway did something that looked almost irrational at the time. It locked the money away. And the decision that made that possible wasn't made by economists. It was made by politicians who chose to constrain themselves. Norway in the 1970s was already stable. Strong institutions, low corruption, fiscal discipline built over decades. Oil didn't rescue a broken state. It arrived into a system that already functioned. The question wasn't survival, it was strategy. What do you do with a sudden, massive, temporary windfall that could corrupt everything you've carefully built? Norway's answer would define the country for generations. The critical decision came in 1990. One rule: all oil revenue goes into the fund. None enters the domestic budget directly. The government spends only the returns, capped at 3% per year. The principal stays locked permanently. That's it. That's the decision. Not the oil discovery, not the state company. The decision to build a wall between oil wealth and political spending, and to make that wall permanent. At the time, this looked almost impossible to defend politically. Norway had real needs: roads, hospitals, schools. The oil was right there. The pressure to spend was enormous. And here's what makes this remarkable. The constraint was entirely self-imposed. No international body required it. No crisis forced it. Norwegian politicians voluntarily limited their own access to the money they controlled. Why? Because they understood the trap. Oil is finite. Prices collapse without warning. If the state becomes structurally dependent on crude revenue, the entire system becomes hostage to a commodity it cannot control. The fund wasn't idealism. It was institutional self-defense. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They compounded. First, fiscal insulation. When oil prices crashed in 2014, petrostates buckled across the world. Norway barely moved. The budget ran on investment returns, not crude prices. The cushion held precisely because it was never spent. But the fund didn't just stabilize the budget, it changed Norway's power. Stakes in 9,000 companies across 70 countries. Norway, 5 million people, now owns 1.5% of all listed global equities. That's not a savings account, that's strategic capital, operating at planetary scale. When global markets grow, Norway grows with them, independent of what happens to crude prices. And because oil money never flooded local markets directly, it didn't inflate the currency, it didn't kill manufacturing, it didn't hollow out the industries that every other resource economy quietly loses. Norwegian industry survived because the wealth was deliberately kept at a distance. Then something else happened. The rules became self-reinforcing. The longer the fund existed, the more politically untouchable it became. Each generation inherited a stronger constraint. The institution learned to protect itself. Now here's what happens when that wall doesn't exist. Kazakhstan. Oil-rich, state-controlled, but oil revenue went straight into the government budget. Subsidies, infrastructure, patronage networks. When prices crashed, the economy crashed with them. The currency lost 50% of its value almost overnight. The dependency was total because the design made it total. Same resource, opposite architecture. Norway built a firewall. Kazakhstan built a direct pipeline from oil wells into political spending. One structure compounds wealth across generations. The other collapses the moment the price drops. Geopolitically, the fund flipped Norway's position entirely. Most petrostates quietly bend their foreign policy toward whoever buys their crude. Norway inverted that logic. It became a capital exporter, not just a commodity exporter. It doesn't just sell oil to the world, it owns pieces of the world. The oil revenue eventually stops. The equity returns don't. 5 million people, trillion-dollar leverage. That's what institutional design looks like when it works across generations. The lesson isn't about oil. It's about what happens when an institution is designed to survive political pressure, not just today, but across decades. Norway created a commitment device, a mechanism that made short-term temptation structurally impossible to act on. Future governments couldn't raid the fund without dismantling the institution that defined modern Norway. The rule protected itself by becoming too valuable to break. Most resource states extract wealth from the ground and let it bleed out through political cycles. Norway extracted wealth from the ground and built a permanent machine, one that now generates returns independent of the original resource. The oil is finite. The institution it created is not. Oil created wealth. Rules created power.